Hello and welcome to today's meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson. My name is Larry Vodine and I'm the president of Democrats of Greater Tucson, and I will be your host today. We have an excellent speaker and an excellent topic coming up today. It's the Constitution and Donald J. Trump. And we have Bob McWhirter on the line. He is a trial attorney in Phoenix and he's been a trial lawyer for 30 years. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. Good to be here.
A couple of quick announcements, if I may. I'm going to put on my Democratic delegate hat. I got this from the national and the state party. So I'm a national delegate, and I just want to give you a quick briefing of what's taken place today. Early this morning, there was a Labor County caucus meeting, and it was just fantastic. It was labor leaders from all over the country pledging their support for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And the most moving speaker, and I'm going to try to put a video of him online, was Rich Trumpa, the president of the AFL-CIO. Just reading from my handwritten notes here, he pointed out that 167,000 people have died from the pandemic, and Trump just says, it is what it is. Trumpa said, well, try telling that to a bus operator in Maplewood, New Jersey, who died from COVID-19, which he contracted on the job. You know, try telling his family it is what it is. And one of the takeaways I got from the Labor Caucus was, you know, Wall Street did not build America. The middle class built America, and unions built the middle class. I attended also the Hispanic caucus meeting at 9 o'clock this morning. They had, among many speakers, Julian Castro, the former HUD director under Obama. And he said the Latino community is in a state of crisis, state of emergency, because so many Latino workers are what they call essential workers, meaning that they work in the farm fields, they work in the meat packing plants, they work in grocery stores, fast food places, and in hospitality industry. And 84% of Latinos cannot get to work, cannot work from home. They have to go out in the public and report for their jobs. And it's just caused all sorts of economic damage to the Latino community. And of course, a health crisis. Latinos are much more likely to get the coronavirus than people in other groups. And so, if you're interested, you can follow me on Facebook. I'm going to be live blogging on Facebook. And you just go to Facebook and you want to look at LD9 Democrats, and you'll find my material there. But back to today's program. So I want to give a proper introduction to Bob McWhirter. As Trump claims to make America great again, he finds himself repeatedly bumping up against the greatest charter of government on the planet, and that's the U.S. Constitution. And today we have attorney Bob McWhirter, who is going to talk about Trump and the Electoral College, as well as Trump and presidential powers and other topics. Bob practices law in Phoenix, and he's an award-winning and internationally recognized speaker and author on the history of the Bill of Rights. He's even got a book out called An Illuminated History of the Bill of Rights. Very much worth taking a look at. Bob is a certified specialist in criminal law in Arizona, and he's qualified by the Arizona Supreme Court to defend capital cases. And with that, Bob, let me turn it over to you. Tell us what you've got.
Good. Thank you very much. Yeah, first of all, I was also recently, as many of you know, a candidate for Maricopa County Attorney. I have endorsed the person that won that primary, and so that tells you something that we didn't. I am a criminal lawyer. Things are a little slow under COVID, so could you please tell your friends to commit crimes and then hire me to help them, because I kind of need to get the business up and running again. I'm going to share the screen here. Well, this course is the Constitution, Donald Trump. Good. I will tell you that over the course of the last 4 years or so, I have given 12 versions of this talk. If you wanted, I could literally have you here for about 15 hours of programming related to the issues and the Constitution and Donald Trump. I will tell you that after even a few hours, I even get bored with me. So thankfully, we're not going to go into all that. But there's just so much here that's been going on over the last 4 years. And I take it as a great opportunity to learn about the Constitution. As you've heard, I've written the book, Bills, Quills, and Stills, the Illuminated Bill of Rights. And I'm a frequent guest on Arizona Horizon, talking about the Constitution and other issues. So let's go about making the Constitution great again. Louis Brandeis wrote, "The greatest menace to society is an inert people." Whitney versus California, I'd recommend that opinion to you, widely regarded as one of the best opinions written on the Supreme Court. The point of Donald Trump is to learn about the Constitution. Thucydides, who the framers of our Constitution read, wrote, "Here in Athens, each individual is interested not only in his own affairs, but in the affairs of the state as well. Of all people, we alone do not say that a man who takes no interest in politics is a man who minds his own business, but we say that he is useless." Our word idiot comes from the Greek idiots, which is a person incapable of engaging in the public sphere. Now, for the Greeks, that just didn't mean somebody who didn't have the mental capacity. It was a person who was so wrapped up in his own business or whatnot that he turned out to be an idiot. Well, the point is, we're not idiots. It's versus a pelotes or pelotes, which is a person who is in the engaged public citizen. That's what Donald Trump, in a sense, has done for us. Have you even read the United States Constitution? I will gladly lend you my copy. In this document, look for the words liberty and equal protection of law. Of course, Donald Trump's response was to say, "Mr. Khan, who has never met me, has no right to stand in front of millions of people and claim that I've never read the Constitution, which is false." All right. Well, Donald Trump did speak about enthusiastically supporting the Constitution. On July 7, 2016, before he was elected, he enthusiastically claimed that he would support the whole Constitution. Not only will I stand up for Article 1, I'll stand up for Article 2, Article 12, you name it, of the Constitution. Okay. Well, I think we should get something straight. There are only 7 articles in the Constitution. There's not 12 articles in the Constitution, only 7. And frankly, you only really have to worry about 6 because Article 7 was just about how to set up the whole government, and they already did that in the 18th century. The Constitution has been amended 27 times, unless you don't count the 8th Amendment, which was wiped out by the 21st Amendment, in which case it's technically only been amended 25 times. Because remember, the 18th Amendment wipes out the 21st Amendment. And by the way, if you ever want to look smart at a Communist Party, just think, what is the drinking age in some states? 18. What is the drinking age in other states? 21. So the 18th Amendment prohibited alcohol prohibition, and the 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment. So you always have an easy way to remember those 2 amendments. Now, the first time Donald Trump took an oath to defend the Constitution was when he became president. He is the first president in history who had never taken an oath to defend the Constitution except on his inauguration day. Every president from Washington to Obama had either served in the military or been a member of the bar before becoming president. So January 20th was Donald Trump's first day. As Larry and I will tell you, both Larry and I took an oath to defend the Constitution when we were admitted to the state bar. So let's talk about Donald Trump and the Electoral College, because this issue is coming up now. And I tried to select things that would be the most relevant to what's going on right now. When Donald talked about stand up for Article 12, he might have been thinking about the 12th Amendment. And what the 12th Amendment did was redefined the way the Electoral College chooses the president. Because before the 12th Amendment, whoever got the most amount of votes became president, whoever got the second amount of votes became vice president, and it didn't lead for a very harmonious relationship between the president and vice president. So you've got the inauguration in 2009, inauguration in 2017. Remember, there was some controversy about the crowd size at that point. Trump only won the presidency, as we know, because of the Electoral College. He lost the popular vote by 2 to 3 million, close to 3 million votes. Now, why does this go on? There is probably, well, this crowd might be a little different. Usually when I talk to most people, I will tell you, there's probably nobody in the room who actually votes for the President of the United States. Now, Larry may be an exception, and maybe there's a few people on this call. We actually don't elect the President of the United States. What we do is we vote for electors. And each state gets to elect the number, gets electors from the number of representatives and senators in their state. There are 435 congresspersons plus 100 senators. Then the District of Columbia gets 3 just for being the District of Columbia. That means there are 538 electors. 1/2 of 538 is 269. That means you need 270 delegates to win the presidency of the United States. Okay. So that's how that math comes about. All right. 6 states have 3 electors. Their populations would never justify this. Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Alaska, and I believe it's Rhode Island over there, or Delaware, excuse me. So they get that because the Constitution says each state gets 2 senators and 1 representative, regardless of the population of the state. So each elector in Wyoming represents about 100,000 people. Each elector in California represents about 22 million people. So this is the baked-in unfairness in the Electoral College. So 1 Wyoming voter's voting power is 4 Arizona voters. Now, what was the purpose of the Electoral College? According to Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 68, the electors come directly from the people to avoid party-run legislatures. The electors guard against somebody unqualified but with talent for low intrigue and little arts of popularity from attaining the presidency. That was the purpose. I think we can all agree that that was an utter and total failure. That the Electoral College, at least Hamilton's justification of it, utterly and totally failed, and it hasn't done that in the least. The Electoral College is a failure. So, why will the Electoral College not change? There have been 5 times in American history the popular vote has been different than the Electoral College vote. Starting in 1824, John Quincy Adams cut a deal with Henry Clay, basically to block out Jackson. Jackson came back in 1830 as the first Democratic candidate. Also, by the way, the first party convention, which we may be seeing the end of, the physical party convention today, but this was the first one in 1830. You have 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes beats Samuel Tilden by cutting a deal with the South End Reconstruction. 1880, Republican James Garfield beat Winfield Scott Hancock, Civil War hero. 2000, Republican George W. Bush beat Al Gore. And of course, 2016, Donald Trump beats Hillary Clinton. Republicans have always won in the Electoral College, so why would they change it? With the exception perhaps of 1824, because of course there wasn't a Republican Party, but at least the interests that were reflected in the old Federalist Party won in 1824. Every other time, Republicans have been the beneficiary of the Electoral College system. We Democrats have taken a hit in at least 4 of those 5 times. So when you have a major party that's not going to get back behind the idea of changing the Electoral College, you're probably never going to have a constitutional amendment go through to change the Electoral College, much less having an act in Congress or anything else to do so. Donald Trump, I did what was an almost impossible thing to do for a Republican, easily won the Electoral College, now tax returns are brought up again. Well, actually, that is utterly and totally incorrect. Republicans always win in the Electoral College. We Democrats are the ones that lose in the Electoral College. The Electoral College is a disaster for a democracy. He says that before, when it looked like Hillary was going to sweep it. Afterwards, the Electoral College is actually genius, brings all the states, including smaller, into play. Campaigning is much different. Personally, that's utterly absurd, because what would bring all the states into play is if you had popular votes, which means a Democrat would want to campaign in Texas and a Republican would want to campaign in California to pick up those extra votes to go for an overall electoral strategy. So I'm going to just talk about trumping the post office. By the way, you could change the Electoral College in about 4 different ways. There are actually 3 ways to amend the Constitution. You could have the normal way is to have a resolution from Congress that goes out 3/4 of the states, etc. You could actually have constitutional conventions. in the different states. You could also have Congress calling for a constitutional convention. So there's actually 3 ways under the Constitution to change the Constitution. There are 2 independent ways, which is you could have a compact, which some states have agreed to, that says that their electoral votes will go whoever gets the popular vote nationally. Or what I think would actually be easiest, you could do what Maine and Nebraska do, which is they allocate their electoral votes according to the popular vote. So, for instance, in Arizona has 11 electoral votes. Donald Trump took all of them, but if you base that on the popular vote, Donald Trump should have gotten 6 and Hillary should have gotten 5. And so you could actually create that. And by the way, all of this is defined by state law, not federal law. So you could actually change the state and say, hey, we're going to apportion votes according to the popular vote in a more fair manner, rather than the winner-take-all provision. And if you look at Donald Trump's margin of victory in states like Arizona and Michigan and Wisconsin, he probably would not have won the presidency had you apportioned votes according to the actual vote, or apportion electoral delegates according to the popular vote in the state. Okay, what about trumping the post office? The Constitution in Article 1, Section 8 says Congress shall have power to establish post offices and roads. Congress need not establish a post office, but they have the power to do so if they choose. So in 1792, they had the Postal Service Act. It was modified in 1970 and 2006. The president cannot abolish a post office. Now, the issue, of course, is if he regulates it or cuts back on it to the point that by the time you have a court case to get him to stop doing that, it might be too late for the election, and that's what the fear that we have now about that. So just really quickly about that. Let's talk about Donald Trump and prerogative power. Some justices on the Supreme Court are into this idea. I think it's a terrible idea. Justice Clarence Thomas, Article 2, the president has all the prerogatives of a British king except where the Constitution specifies otherwise. Okay, this is Clarence Thomas and other people who are usually in the Federalist Society like to postulate. Those who ratified the Constitution understand the executive power vested by Article 2 to include those foreign affairs powers not otherwise allocated to the Constitution. I think that is absolute reverse of the way of thinking of the framers of our Constitution, who basically said that you don't get a power unless we say you do. In other words, there's not residual powers in any other institution besides the Congress. They're the only residual powers, and even they are limited by the Constitution. The powers the president has are actually very circumscribed. So this idea is, okay, whatever George II, George III had at the time of the Revolution, the president gets to keep. Okay, well, that's just wrong. That's not the original intent of the framers. The president is an instrument of the law of the land, subject to the law of the land, and obliged to obey the law of the land. It is the executive branch. They are supposed to execute the statutes that Congress puts forward. The president only has power to execute law Congress makes. Gouverneur Morris, to safely distribute one, the power of making, another of executing, and the third of judging, the executive power is only to implement instructions from valid legislative power. So there is no residual power per se in the presidency in the area of foreign affairs or anything else. Now, the Constitution does directly give the president certain powers. He can veto, he can make appointments, he can do pardons, commander-in-chief, receive foreign ambassadors, demand reports from subordinates, and deliver a State of the Union. There's a few other little peddling powers, but that is about it. If you think of every other power the president has, it is pursuant to an act of Congress. Okay? All else comes from Congress. Okay? So, for instance, the power of the president to implement immigration law or the Environmental Protection Agency are all based on statutes that the Congress has passed. The president signs into law, but those delegation of power comes from Congress to the president. It's not residual in the president at all. And any number of those could be changed in a moment by a statute. Congress decides how to fill any gaps in the system. See, that was part of the genius of the Constitution. Our Constitution is a relatively short document. I mean, you can spend an evening and read through it. And the point was, it had to have the definition of fundamental principles and a mechanism of government that works for everybody, but also the flexibility to work within that framework to attend to the needs and issues that come up through the course of history. The Constitution, Congress, not the President, is expressly authorized to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the government. So again, it's Congress, by the very Constitution itself, that provides those foundation for any exercise of presidential power. Turning Point USA, Teen Student Action Summit in 2019. I to where I have the right to do whatever I want as president. By the way, the syntax is the 45th president's, not mine. But I don't even talk about that. Okay, Richard Nixon, when the president does it, that means it is not illegal. All right, we've been here before with these issues, and the courts have said, no, that's not right, and it's fundamentally not the way our government is structured. James I, who's James VI of Scotland, used to say, Rex est loquens, which is the king is the law speaking. This was why the Stuart monarchs always had problems and ended up getting overturned. Samuel Rutherford at the same time wrote, Lex Rex, the law is king. So Rex est loquens, the king is the law speaking, isn't correct. Lex Rex, the law is king, is the foundation of America. And it was a lot of that reaction of Parliament to the Stuart monarchs, which is the foundation of our Constitution, our form of government, and the way we should read the Constitution. Lex Rex. The framers did not believe in giving the president a reservoir of royal power, only the power to execute the law Congress. So this is crucial stuff. Okay. I'm going to wrap this little talk up here about the Constitution and Trumpism, and then I'm happy to take questions. I've kind of planned for about a half hour, and then we can answer any questions. What is the effect of Donald Trump really? Trumpism and Nazism, you often get this comparison, and there is a high correlation of the Trump voter. One of the key characteristics of a Trump voter actually isn't all ideology per se. It's somebody who has a kind of adherence to authoritarianism. That tends to be your average Trump voter. I would say that the comparison between Adolf Hitler and Donald Trump is fundamentally unfair. For one thing, Donald is not as talented as Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler actually wrote Mein Kampf. Okay? Donald Trump didn't write his own book, and we all know it. And Tony Schwartz has often talked about this. So, I mean, there's just not the same reservoir of talent. Adolf never needed a ghostwriter. He was just bad on his own. On the evening of May 10th, 1933, some 4.5 months after Hitler became chancellor, there occurred in Berlin a scene which had not been witnessed in the Western world since the late Middle Ages. At about midnight, a torchlight parade of thousands of students ended at a square. Torches were put to a huge pile of books that had been gathered there, and as the flames enveloped them, more books were thrown on the fire until some 20,000 had been consumed. Similar scenes took place in several other cities. The book burning had begun. Dr. Goebbels, the new propaganda minister who from now on was to put put German culture into a Nazi straitjacket, addressed the students as the burning books turned to ashes. The soul of the German people can now express itself. The flames not only illuminate the final end of an old era, but also light up a new, said Dr. Goebbels. Okay, well, Stephen Miller, by the way, wrote Trump's advisor ban on travel. The end result of this is that our opponents, the media, and the whole world will soon see that as we begin to take further actions, that the powers of the president to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned. Okay, this is an inherently un-American statement. We question everything. We even question good things. The other thing, too, is, I mean, okay, the similarity between Stephen Miller and Joseph Goebbels, I understand that you can't really control the way you look, And if you happen to look like the grandson of Joseph Goebbels, okay, maybe that's not fair. On the other hand, if you do, don't say stupid things that are kind of like semi-fascist like he does and expect not to get the comparison. All right, leaving that aside. Two presidents have fundamentally changed the nature of the Constitution. One, of course, is Abraham Lincoln. Fundamentally, we have a different Constitution than we did from the framers of 1789 and 1791 because of Abraham Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation, and, of course, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. If you recall, the movie Lincoln was about getting the 13th Amendment passed through the House of Representatives. Of course, he did not live to see it, but it was his spirit and what he did to change the Constitution in response to the Civil War. Now, of course, the second was Franklin Roosevelt. Not so much through constitutional amendment, although there were some during that era, but a massive reworking and re-understanding based on the need of the time and today of the structure of the government. Just take Social Security, if nothing else. And the, let's say, coaxing of the courts to understand that those were perfectly permissible under the constitutional structure. Okay. But Donald Trump fundamentally works within the context of institutions. He hasn't really changed the institutions. If you look at the Electoral College, the office of the presidency, he wants to take advantage of all those things, but he's working within that, Congress and the courts. I quoted from the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich because, you know, there actually hasn't been any book burnings. There hasn't been press shutdown. Now, this is not excusing anything about the horrible behavior of the 45th President of the United States, but they're fundamentally within this context. Trump is basically hapless regarding the Constitution. He clearly doesn't understand it and doesn't even know enough to really destroy it other than by his enablers, right? Look at Trump's use of executive orders. Many subject to court challenge, but all basically within presidential powers, and all can be constitutionally challenged. This guy has written more executive orders than all of his predecessors. Well, you know, the thing about an executive order is the next person who occupies the seat with a stroke of a pen can change them all. They have no legislative force. It's just a direction of the way laws are executed and interpretations. There has been only one major piece of legislation during the Trump presidency. Only one, and that is the tax bill. And frankly, you want to call it that, that's Paul Ryan's achievement. That was not Donald Trump's achievement. It's Paul Ryan. The Senate Republicans went nuclear with Supreme Court judges and justices and federal judges. Donald Trump had nothing to do with that. He was just there. That he is benefiting from Mitch McConnell's strategy for over 20 years. This is Mitch McConnell's achievement. Again, if you want to call it achievement, not Donald Trump's. Donald Trump's have been hapless in all of these things. Trump and making money off the presidency, I mean, he was blatant about that. During an official briefing, Sarah Huckabee Sanders plugs the Trump International Hotel at Waikiki. It has been a tremendously successful project, and he wanted to say hello and thank you to all the employees for their hard work. Well, that's just shocking that a press secretary of the United States is plugging a hotel. But that seems to be the direction and orientation. The only thing I can think closely of it is when John F. Kennedy sent out Pierre Salinger to buy up all the cigars from Cuba in the Washington, D.C. area just before he signed the Cuban Embargo Act to make sure that there were plenty of Cuban cigars in the White House humidifier. But this is a far cry different than what was going on. This raises the fundamental question about Donald Trump. Does he understand our institutions well enough to destroy them? I would say not. He is not directed. Now, he's got a destructive mannerism and personality, but he's not really directed like some of the people around him to really fundamentally destroying institutions. And also, as we were speaking before, all of his things have a common quality. Fake news media, failing New York Times, NBC News, ABC, and CBS, CNN is not my enemy, it's the enemy of the American people. You know, every time he says the failing New York Times, the New York Times subscriptions go up. I think the failing New York Times would actually like Donald Trump to keep saying that. but it's just getting kind of comic. It's horrible, but it's kind of comic. It's like he's howling at the moon all the time. We shall overcome. Again, it's this comic quality to the entire thing. So why is it that we have all this government structure? Well, Federalist number 51. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In forming a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in that you must first enable the government to control the governed, and in this second place, oblige it to control itself. Okay. That's the fundamental reason why all of these institutions and structures exist. American institutions are still fundamentally strong and fundamental. There is a very loud Trumpian crowd, but I think the reaction to this is remarkable with him. And that is a good thing. Congress, the legislative branch, the powers of the president, Article 3, the power of the courts is well specified. Power to vote. This is what we've all been waiting for now for years, and this is key and fundamental. So let's make the Constitution great again, and we can go out and vote in November. Are there any questions at this point?
Bob, that was totally awesome. Bob, I got to say that the one thing I took away was the first thing that you said, which is that the greatest menace to freedom is an inert people. And that's what we can't have among Democrats. We can't have inert Democrats. Now is the time to go out and find a candidate you like and get behind them. Here's the question. Trump said he might delay the election. Can he do that under the Constitution?
No, he can't. Under the Constitution, it doesn't specify when the election will be, but it does specify that there is going to be a change of power in January. And if he delays it, you want to know who becomes president? Nancy Pelosi. There was only one time in American history where this was ever seriously discussed, and it was the 1864 election. Abraham Lincoln knew by all indicators that he was going to lose that election, and he was being advised because of the national emergency of the Civil War to delay the election, to put it off until the crisis was over. And fundamentally, to understanding Abraham Lincoln and even Gettysburg Address and how it's all connected, his fundamental core belief was the importance of a democratic republic. And Abraham Lincoln refused to delay the election, and to the surprise of everybody, plus a few battlefield victories at the last minute, he not only won the election, the Electoral College, the popular vote, but he won the soldiers' vote too, and of the Union soldiers in the field. So that's the only time it was ever seriously discussed, and we certainly aren't there. But Donald Trump will continue to talk about that.
I noticed that that Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution establishes the post office. Mm-hmm. And Congress has established it, and Trump is trying to strangle it through his postmaster. Can that be done constitutionally?
No, not constitutionally. The trouble is the mechanism for dealing with it can be kind of slow. Nancy Pelosi has called Congress back into session to pass something. Hopefully the Republicans who think this is a terrible idea will get behind it in the Senate, and that can then direct Congress. If you are an official, like the guy in charge of the post office, do you follow the law or do you follow what your boss, the president, says? I think the clear understanding of the Constitution is follow the law, even if your boss doesn't like it. And if you don't forget, Richard Nixon didn't go to prison, but several of his people did. And if I was representing any member of the Trump administration, I would never fail to point that out, which is, okay, you can deny a subpoena from Congress, sure, but don't forget, Donald Trump's not always going to be president, and you can still be charged with contempt of Congress and end up going to prison for failing to follow the law. So yeah, the president has no ability, and if he regulates it out, the only trouble and fear that we have, of course, is that by the time we can fix this through court action, The election's already up and running and going. But I would also say, too, given the Trump personality, what is this really about? This is really about so that he can whine afterwards when he loses by saying that somehow it was a fraud, it was unfair, it was a hoax, and all that stuff. Because I think Donald Trump knows he's headed to a defeat. And don't let my abysmal prediction to predict the 2016 election to deter you in having confidence in what I just said.
All right, Bob, I got a legal question for you here. So the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that it was constitutional for Trump to take money that was allocated by Congress for the Defense Department and misuse it on the stupid wall with Mexico. Tell us your opinion about that decision by the Supreme Court.
Utterly, I think it's a decision that is controlled by certain of the conservatives in the Constitution on the court. I think that's simply wrong. And that's part of the reason why I selected that one thing about prerogative powers. The Congress controls the purse strings. Now, there is enough give in this. You have to allow the executive branch freedom to use funds to respond to emergencies. And Congress does have the power to immediately go in and change the allocation of those funds. And that was partly what the court was basing it on, not wanting to get into a turf war between the president and the Congress. But I just think that opinion was fundamentally wrong and fundamentally misunderstanding of the power of the presidency to execute the laws that Congress has. But to be consistent, this is part of the same thinking behind the DACA case, where they came in and said, the original reason for getting rid of DACA by Jeff Sessions was he made this stupid argument that Obama didn't have the authority to make an executive order on that topic. Well, that was simply wrong. And the court said, no, that's wrong. Of course, President Obama did. I think what we really need to do is have a re-examination of the amount of delegated power Congress has given to the executive branch. And that's a discussion that I think both Republicans and Democrats can come together on. Because what the Republicans have done, the ones who have called Obama this imperial presidency, which was absurd, have just let this president go crazy with executive orders. And so that's a valid topic for discussion, I think.
My name is Maureen Brooks, and I'm in Green Valley. I want to thank you, Mr. McWhirter, for taking the time to do this. I'm an attorney, and I have had a great love for the Constitution and relied on it over and over, both legally and mentally, to keep my sanity. I agree that there's a comic quality to Trump, and I agree that he may not understand the Constitution well enough, but he has surrounded himself with people like his personal attorney, Barr, and I am concerned, because I will put nothing past this man, that there are, in fact, emergency powers, but he does have the power to declare an emergency. He declared an immigration emergency in order to slice through various laws and build his wall. I would put nothing past this man to suspend the Constitution, declare an emergency, then the Constitution. Who, in fact, is going to stop him?
Well,
Mr. McWhirter, do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, no, I do. And look, the fact that we are even discussing that is frightening.
It's part of way.
In his first, the fact that we would even discuss the possibility of somebody losing an election and not respecting the results of the election or whatnot with everything. But that being said, Doris Kearns Goodwin has often been asked this question. She said, you know what? The day after the election, if he doesn't walk out in January, the Secret Service will carry him out. And frankly, if you look at the kind of response of the military that have been around him, I don't think he would have the backing of the military in the least if he stayed in power. What I worry more about is somebody in the future who's more capable than Donald Trump, who could be a real danger other than the buffoonery that goes on. And that, of course, is not to kind of denigrate or negate the fears that you're expressing, because I have them too. But if you just look at the overall picture, somebody could cut a deal with him and he'll leave in a heartbeat. So the mechanisms, of course, are, you have an entire governmental structure and people in place who understand the Constitution who just say, look, it's time for you to walk out of the building. Bye. And, if not, I would shoot him. Okay.
All right, Susie Anderson has her hand raised. So Susie, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Bob, I was just wondering something historically. How did the soldiers get to vote? Did they have the same kind of system as they do in the military, where they have their mail-in ballots that they can fill out? It just seems to me like that long ago. How did the soldiers get their ballots? So
In
that
1864, I think the quartermaster general had something to do with that, but the mechanism, I'm not sure. I think they actually just took the ballots. But it's an interesting question. It's like, well, if mail-in ballots worked in 1864, why wouldn't they work today? I'm writing the chapter on, my next book is the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And I'm about ready to start writing the 15th Amendment, which is the right to vote and universal right to vote. And I might do some research on that very question to see how they pulled that off in 1860.
I know if the troops are stationed any place, they have their mail-in ballots, and the branch of the service.
Right. Well, I think we have a more direct question, which is, how is a mail-in ballot different today than an absentee ballot? And how is a mail-in ballot in Florida somehow different than a mail-in ballot in California?
I have, does the Constitution allow the Congress to have any enforcement ability? With all the subpoenas being ignored and having to go to court over every last one of them, and those kinds of things, can they get their own little police and go pull those people? They're federal employees. Pull those people and bring them to Congress?
Last time it happened was in 1924. 3 ways, principally, that Congress can enforce its will. They can hold you in contempt of, well, actually 4 ways. Hold you in contempt of Congress. They can go to court and reduce that to a contempt of court, which then you can be put in jail for contempt of court until you comply. You can refer your case to the Department of Justice for a charge, contempt of Congress, which is a specific criminal statute. Of course, you could probably have to wait until you have a different attorney general to pull that off. Or the old-fashioned way is Congress used to actually send its sergeant at arms to go out and arrest people and put them in local jails. In fact, I think there was a congressman today that said that they wanted the head of the post office, the sergeant at arms, to go get him if he doesn't come in and testify. That just that kind of went out of style. I think the last one was somebody connected with the Teapot Dome scandal. Again, it was 1824. And it really hasn't been used because it could get kind of confusing and ugly. But theoretically, Congress has the power to directly do that, and it is inherited from Parliament, which had the power to hold people in contempt.
That's interesting.
Thank you.
Part of it is in Parliament. In Parliament, exercises not only legislative power but executive power, because remember, the Prime Minister is of the main party in power. He becomes Prime Minister because of legislative election, not a separate executive like we have in the United States, because the head of government in England is the Queen, not the Prime Minister. In America, the head of state is the Queen. The head of government's the Prime Minister. In America, both those functions are together in the presidency.
All right, we've got some more questions coming up. One from Steve and Christina Early, also members of our board. Christina, go ahead.
Actually, it's my question, Larry.
Oh.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. And Donald Trump is the acting commander-in-chief of the United States military. As such, when he took the oath of office, he swore to uphold the laws and the Constitution and to protect his employees and his people. The Russians put a bounty on our soldiers. He knew about it and he did nothing about it and has admitted. Is that treasonous?
Well, you should have attended the Constitution of Donald Trump Part 8. According to Donald Trump's own definition of treason, it is.
Exactly.
So I'm not,
So when he talks about other people being treasonous, if you applied his definition to himself, he's in bad trouble legally.
so it's no problem with me calling him a traitor? On his moniker, I call him Traitor Trump.
Yeah, I
I'm with that.
like the idea of just fraud, Don, but okay.
I like traitor better, but
Later better. Yeah, that's a look. In the Constitution, Article 2, it says, providing, you have to have two witnesses, providing, kind of assistance to the enemy, that kind of stuff. And then there's a federal statute that kind of helps define that. That's a little bit hard. I think the bounty thing certainly starts to approach it more than just about anything else he's done. It certainly would be an issue for impeachment and a potential issue for a criminal charge later on.
Yeah.
thank you.
Add it
Thank
to the
you.
list, though. It'd be, if you want to take everything against Donald Trump, you're talking one long indictment. Okay.
So you just alluded to prosecution. What's the likelihood that Trump will be prosecuted after leaving office for any specific act or malfeasance?
Well, again, when I was talking about the Constitution of Donald Trump, Part 4, I talked about the president's power to pardon himself. And I don't think he really does. And I would tell him never to do that if I was his lawyer. I think he's amenable to prosecution in several different ways, but also prosecution by the state of New York, which, if you recall from the Mueller investigation, he very cleverly kind of shared everything with New York, which means Trump could only pardon himself from federal crimes, if at all. And that means he could still be prosecuted in New York for any number of things. The reason why, as a lawyer, I would tell Trump, do not pardon yourself, is because a pardon is an admission of guilt. And then the pardon you actually have to, if the crime was committed. So if Trump pardons himself after kind of tacitly or directly admitting guilt, and a court rules that a president cannot pardon himself, which seems reasonable to me, well, then you admitted the crime without having to have the government prove it. If you pardoned yourself and you just got nothing out of it, you just made a statement admitting the crime you committed, and probably under oath. So as a lawyer, I would tell him, don't pardon yourself. You just could end up really messing it up. But he is certainly amenable. Now, the pardon power, if you go back to Alexander Hamilton in '68, he talks about the pardon power being so that the country can move on. That's what happened with the Whiskey Rebellion with George Washington. That's what happened after the Civil War. That's what happened with Jimmy Carter and the draft evaders. And in retrospect, that's what Gerald Ford did with Richard Nixon. At the time, myself and my family were very critical. It's widely viewed as having been the right decision because it allowed the country to move on. I also say that we have a great tradition in America of not prosecuting our former presidents when a new party in power comes in for crimes. And I think we should maintain that. However, with this particular president, I make an exception.
All right, let me just look through here. Albert Cox, your hand is raised. Please unmute yourself and ask Bob a question.
Bob, it's not so much a question. I found that this has been very informative, but you outlined what Trump cannot do under the Constitution. Unfortunately, we have about 35–40% of the American people who believe anything he says he can do, and I think that's going to be a great danger. How can we educate the general population? You were kidding earlier about having friends commit crimes and then having business to do. I'm wondering if ignorance could be declared a crime.
My worry is not as much Donald Trump as that 30% you're talking about. But let's be fair. I'm going to just kind of throw some numbers out there, and I haven't empirically kind of studied this, but let's take a look at who the Trump voters are, right? Let's say at any given time in America, you have 15% of people that would vote for Adolf Hitler. Forget them. They're terrible. Okay. They just don't get to come to the party. Okay, you're not going to ever convince them. They're just a little bit nutty. Okay. If you look at the other Trump voters, you've got some people who are single issue gun people who might be wrong, but not necessarily bad people. And you have a lot of people who are pro-life, and they're utterly and totally committed to that issue. And frankly, Trump has produced for them. He has given them the judges that they think they want. But again, a lot of them I don't think are bad people and necessarily supportive of Trump. They're just single issue. Once you start breaking it down, maybe we can look at, maybe there's not quite that many so bad. The trouble that I worry about is, let's say you get a true authoritarian, manipulative person that understands and really wants power and not just kind of personal approval and economic success. Can there be a ugly populist in the future that takes the Trump playbook and then really destroys democracy? That's what I worry about. As far as educating people, I think we got to just keep talking. And hey, I give these talks all over the place, so I'm doing my bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, what worries me a little bit too is a lot of the teaching I do, especially among younger people, is remedial. And that's a little problematic. Stuff isn't being taught in schools like it should be.
Let's see, Patricia Weedhop, please unmute yourself and ask yourself the question.
Hi, thank you so much.
Sure.
I also watched the Sunday program that the very first questioner watched, and they talked about the president's secret powers that no one seems to know about, very few people. And it really was very wisdom. It was on one of the news programs, Sunday news programs yesterday.
You know, I'm sorry.
Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, look, there's a theory perpetuated. The reason why Barr was selected during the Bush administration, he started perpetuating this theory of a unitary presidency. That his theory is that once the president has the power, the only thing you can do is impeach him or vote him out of office. And that all subordinate federal branch kind of employees, et cetera, and cabinet secretaries just have to do what the president says. I believe that is clearly wrong. We do have a unitary presidency in the states, but it's a weak unitary. And to give an example, Arizona, for instance, the executive power is divided among several different elected officials. We have a governor, we have an attorney general, we have superintendent of public instruction. We have all these different officials that are independently elected. So the attorney general is not necessarily beholden to the governor in Arizona, because he didn't depend on the governor to get his job, all right? Well, in the United States, that's not the way it is. You do have the attorney general who is proposed by the president and approved by the Senate. So in one sense, the United States government is unitary presidential power, but it's very weak because the attorney general has independent obligations. Look, I don't like Jeff Sessions in the least, but one thing he did right was when he got into that big tiff with Donald Trump because he followed the law. And Donald Trump went after him for it. Well, Jeff Sessions was doing the right thing there. And that's why, among other reasons why, I just don't think this idea that there's independent presidential powers somehow secretly imbued in the Constitution is correct in the least. In fact, if you look at everything about the way the Constitution was written and the intent of the framers, it's the exact opposite. You don't get power unless we say you do. I think people like, Attorney General Barr are just wrong thinking, wrong headed on that. So.
All right, Bob, we're out of time, and I'm so sorry, Penny and Mary, I know you have questions to ask, but Bob, why don't you tell us how people can get in touch with you if they have questions?
Send me an email. It's bob@robertjmcwhirter.com. It's great to speak to Democrats because I can just say nasty things about Donald Trump and people are fine with that. Nobody's going to accuse me of impartiality because I don't have to make any pretense of partiality in this because I'm not. So it's actually kind of a luxury to be able to talk to a group of Democrats as far as that goes.
Well, Bob, we absolutely loved having you. I learned so much. And as someone who's read the Constitution many times, it's just wonderful to hear your expertise. And I want to thank you again for coming to our program today.
My pleasure.
All right. And with that, I've got to end the program. We're out of time. So we'll see you next Monday at noon.
Very good. See you all. Bye-bye.